You can hear me? Are you guys there? You can hear me? So I think we should start.
Sir, I sent you a question.
Yeah. Yeah. You sent me a question, you're saying?
Yes. On WhatsApp.
On WhatsApp. All right. Acha, you are Noor. ठीक है. Yes, you did. Yeah, I'll mark it and let you know. I'll
Okay,
let you know what the grades are.
Okay,
ठीक है, as soon as it's marked. All right. So we'll continue with consumer and labor protection, right? Consumer and labor laws, consumer and labor protection. I just gave you the basic introduction to the topic last time, in which we learned that the term consumer protection, it is used for government policies that safeguard the interests of consumers, and labor laws, obviously, the government policies that are there to protect the rights of the workforce. Labor laws and consumer protection laws. That's what the topic is. Labor legislation and consumer legislation, or you might use the word consumer protection or labor protection also. All right. So as I was mentioning last time, we are required to quote 3 examples of consumer protection and 3 examples of labor laws. When I say examples, we have to quote the actual act, the actual law, its title, and just a brief explanation. All right. So first, consumer protection. Those policies which are used for safeguarding the interests or protecting the rights of consumers. The first consumer protection law, which is an important one, that is called the Price Control Act. Price Control Act. That is the first consumer protection law that you are recommended that you should mention, because it is one of the most important laws. So Price Control Act, as the name suggests, this basically shows that the government keeps a check on the prices of certain commodities. Okay, the first example, the first law, consumer protection, is the Price Control Act. Each time you have to remember the exact term, Price Control Act. So in this case, the government keeps a check on the prices of certain commodities. All right, there's a list of products. These days, approximately, there are 12 items on the list in our country. And the prices of these products are controlled, are decided, they are determined by the government. Okay, and the purpose is to make sure that these are not overpriced. Okay, the purpose is to make sure that the customers, the masses, the public, they're not overcharged. Okay, and obviously, it should include products which are high in demand and which are consumed by everyone. Just, you know, the price of wheat or the price of rice or the price of sugar. Aajkal we keep hearing this. the price of sugar. The government has announced that, it should be 70 rupees a kg or something. So the government determines the price of certain commodities. Okay? Like in case of pulses, wheat, rice, sugar, petrol, that's the Price Control Act. Okay, now whether it is implemented or not, that's a separate debate, but the law is very much there. Okay, one. The second example could be, we're discussing consumer protection here. That could be the Food and Drug Ordinance. Food and Drug Ordinance. All right, the first one is the Price Control Act. Then we have Food and Drug Ordinance. Food and Drug Ordinance, that is law number 2. This also comes under consumer protection. Food and Drug Ordinance. Okay, so in this case, if you can just remember the term Food and Drug Ordinance, you'll get an idea, a fairly accurate idea. Then in this case, the government keeps an eye on the quality of food items and medicines. Food and Drug Ordinance. And according to this law, the government supervises the production and sale of food items and medicines. I mean, needless to say, these products, they have a direct impact on our health, on the health of consumers, people who consume these products. So the government is there to supervise the production and the quality standards, okay, of these products. Like if somebody is producing medicines, he needs a proper license for this, an NOC is needed. NOC समझते हैं, no objection certificate, a license, a permit, an NOC is needed from the government. ठीक है, ऐसे तो नहीं हो सकता ना कि anybody who wants to, produce a medicine, you can start manufacturing it and selling it. So government keeps an eye. Same is the case with food items. The quality of food items, that should be good because it has a direct influence on our health. These raids that are conducted by the government, on these restaurants, etc. They try to check, whether the proper, environment is being maintained, the hygiene factor and all that. So that's Food and Drug Ordinance. That is also consumer protection. That's number 2. Number 3, Food and Drug Ordinance ke baad, that is the Weights and Measures Act. Number 3 is the Weights and Measures Act. Weights and Measures Act. Okay. Now, Weights and Measures Act, this is a policy, this is a law. Weights and Measures Act is a policy that ensures that there is no overcommitment. Okay, there is no overcommitment on part of the producers and sellers. There should not be any overcommitment. Overcommitment ka matlab hai, there should be no misrepresentation of facts from the producers and sellers. There must not be any misrepresentation of facts. Misrepresentation of facts ka matlab hai, or your overcommitment means not telling the truth. So there should not be any misrepresentation of facts from producers, from sellers. Regarding what? Regarding the weight or quantity of a product. Regarding the weight or quantity of a product. Weights and Measures Act, it ensures that producers and sellers are not allowed to misrepresent the facts. They're not allowed to overcommit to the consumers. They must not lie about the weight and measure or the quantity or the volume of a product. Just say if in a bottle of water, if they're claiming it contains 500 milliliters, then it should contain 500 ml. This is Weights and Measures Act. You can't deceive the customers. ठीक है, if you claim that it has 4 grams of something or 500 milliliters of something, this is how it should be. You can't deceive the customers regarding the weight or quantity or volume of a product. Because consumer protection, obviously, that is why you must have noticed, you know, in many cases, in many products, if you watch closely, on the label it is mentioned plus minus 5%. अक्सर products का लिखा होता है weight पे, you know, itne milligrams, itne grams, plus minus 5%. You know, there might be a slight fluctuation. So this is because they want to avoid any legal implications. Okay? So Price Control Act, Food and Drug Ordinance, Weights and Measures Act, all these come under consumer protection. If you want, we need just 3 laws for consumer protection and we need 3 for labor laws. But you can add 1 more to the list just to be on the safe side. And number 4 ho sakta hai ASA. देखो, ASA stands for Advertising Standards Authority. ASA is Advertising Standards Authority. This is example number 4. ASA is Advertising Standards Authority. Okay? This is a government department that keeps a check on the quality of advertising. Okay? Advertising Standards Authority, you know, this is a department run by the government for keeping a check on the quality of advertising. This also comes under consumer protection. Okay? Keeping a check on advertising means making sure that the advertisements are based on facts and figures. They're based on facts and figures. But the advertisements, again, they should not be used to deceive the customers. They must not overcommit. Okay, in an advertisement, if somebody is claiming to do something, yeah, they're highlighting certain features or ingredients of the product, they should be there. Okay? But keep in mind, aage chal ke we'll be doing marketing also in section 3. You know, there will always be a bit of exaggeration in advertising. Ye to I think we all have an idea. Advertisements, there will always be a bit of exaggeration. There will always be a bit of exaggeration. Because the exaggeration should be understandable. Sometimes, you know, you say something figuratively. So you can't be penalized. Just to enforce something, you know, you make and you come up with an advertisement, you consume this and you start flying and all that. So obviously, that's figurative. You can't really say.
Sir, I have a question for the Price Control Act. Some boxes
Yes,
are labeled with not for individual resale. Does that come under this?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It does. Absolutely. That is a proper law. You have to follow that. And if somebody is going against it, that's a violation of the law. Absolutely. Okay, so basically, the purpose behind all these consumer protection laws is to protect the rights of the consumers. You know, there are consumer courts also even. If a consumer is unhappy with the producer regarding something, quality or something else, there are proper consumer courts and you can file a case against the company. But like I said, in advertising, there will always be a bit of exaggeration, which is understandable. Magar, when they start misquoting figures, it has a content of calcium, which is 10%. Then, of course, then they can be taken to task, then it is easier for the government to penalize them. And ASN, Advertising Standards Authority, it doesn't only keep a check on, you know, the fact that the advertisement is not deceiving the customers, but they also make sure that the advertisement is morally appropriate. ASA ka kaam hai to keep a check, you know, on morals also. They don't, you know, show or say something through an advertisement which is morally or ethically wrong. You know, a racist comment or something, or they show something which is unsuitable. Their job is to keep a check on that also. Okay? So in a way, you might have heard of PEMRA. Pakistan, we have that PEMRA. PEMRA is ASA. PEMRA stands for Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority. The PEMRA deals with the electronic media only. So they serve the purpose of NASA, Advertising Standards Authority. Acha, ab, let's go through a few labor laws. Labor legislation पे आ जाते हैं. Those laws which protect the rights of labor workers. The first labor law that should be quoted here is the minimum wage level law. The first one is the minimum wage level. Very important labor law, minimum wage level law. One of the most important labor laws is the minimum wage level law. Okay, so according to this, the government determines the minimum amount of salary, okay, or the minimum wage rate that should be offered to a worker. Okay, the government decides the minimum wage rate that should be offered to a worker. The government would decide $10 an hour or $12 an hour or $8 an hour, whatever the rate is, whatever the policy is. The government decides that nobody should be underpaid. Very important law for raising the living standards of people. Unfortunately, in developed countries, this law is followed religiously. If the government decides that this is the minimum wage level, you can't violate this. But unfortunately, in developing countries, where there are issues like population and poverty, this law is not implemented properly. If in our country the minimum wage level, if it is around 15,000, let's suppose it keeps on fluctuating, on an average 14 or 16, okay, let's suppose if it's around 15,000, there are millions, as we know, who are underpaid, who get less than that. So the point to be noted is that, in case of minimum wage level, the main purpose is to make sure that no one is underpaid and the living standards, everyone enjoys a decent lifestyle. Okay, so that's the minimum wage level. Another labor law is the Anti-Discrimination Act. Okay, then we have an Anti-Discrimination Act also. Okay, if you can just remember the title, I'm explaining it should not be difficult. So Anti-Discrimination Act, okay, you can easily guess. The purpose is that everyone should get a fair treatment at the workplace. The purpose behind this Anti-Discrimination Act is that everyone should get a fair treatment. Everyone should get a fair treatment at the workplace. There should be no bias, no discrimination, no unfair treatment. Everyone must be treated on merit. On merit. He or she should be treated in terms of his or her performance. The performance hai, that's the criteria that they have to keep in mind. There should be no discrimination on the basis of gender, social background, financial status, appearance, no. So that's Anti-Discrimination Act, so that everyone gets a fair treatment. Child Labor Act ho gaya, Anti-Discrimination Act hai. Then there is the Child Labor Act, anti-discrimination bhi hai, minimum wage level bhi hai. Child Labor Act is number 3. Child Labor Act. Okay, another significant labor law. The children cannot be hired. It is illegal to hire children. It is illegal to hire children, whether it's a factory or it's a workplace. Okay? It even in households also, technically, legally, it is not acceptable that you hire children in families and houses also. So child labor is forbidden. There are proper strict laws regarding this. Okay, but again, the implementation in the developed countries is more effective as compared to the developing countries because of the reasons that I've already highlighted, population and poverty, etc. Okay, but child labor law very much exists. There has been a certain degree of improvement here in child labor, but a lot needs to be done, still needs to be done regarding this. Because we all know in factories, otherwise, mechanics, I mean, everywhere we will find children who are working and there has been some improvement because a couple of contracts were cancelled. Like Nike ka contract, there was another one also, football manufacturing, etc. When they learned that, you know, the factory owners, that they had children, so they canceled the contract. So some improvement, but needless to say, a lot needs to be done. Acha, ye ho gaya. So Child Labor Act, we have the Anti-Discrimination Act, we have the minimum wage level, and like I said, we need 3 laws for labor legislation also. But the fourth one that you can add is health and safety regulations. Health and safety regulations. Health and safety regulations, that is also a labor law. The health and safety regulations, you know, they keep on renewing this law every year. And the objective is, in case of health and safety regulations, the objective is to provide the workers with a safe environment. Provide them with a safe environment, a well-protected environment. Provide them with a safe environment, a well-protected environment. You know, if they're, wherever they're working, they should be properly equipped. It is the responsibility of the employer. The well-being, the safety of the workers is the responsibility of the employer. You know, if they have to be provided with gloves or masks or goggles or helmets or medicines, there's something that should be taken care of by the employer himself. Health and safety regulation. I think this should be good enough. ठीक हो गया? So let's move on to the next topic. That is international trade. Foreign trade, likh lo, foreign trade or international trade. That's going to be our next topic, international trade or foreign trade. Okay? And in very simple terms, foreign trade or international trade, this is just a term used for describing import and export. In very simple terms, what we call import and export, that is our international trade. So technically, if you want to define it, international trade ko, so it is the exchange of goods and services. It is the exchange of goods and services across international boundaries. Exchange of goods and services across international borders, across international boundaries. Exchange of goods and services across international borders or international boundaries. In other words, import or export. Okay? So, you know, in today's world, there's not even a single country. There's not even a single country which is not involved in international trade. All the countries of the world, even, you know, the most isolated ones, even, you know, North Korea, for instance, or Cuba, the isolated ones, even those countries, they participate in international trade. Okay? Either you import something or you export something or both, because as we know, the resources in this world are not distributed equally. There's an unequal distribution of resources in this world. You know, there's certain countries, they have agriculture. There are other countries, they have minerals. There are other countries, they have oil. Some have technology. So because there is an unequal distribution, we have to rely on international trade. Okay. Now, there are a few government policies that are used for regulating international trade. There's certain government policies that are used for regulating international trade, for controlling international trade. Okay, for keeping a check on international trade, या कह सकते हो to use international trade to the country's own advantage. So these government policies that control international trade, they're called restrictions on international trade. They're called restrictions. They're called restrictions on international trade. Okay? So we'll go through these government policies, these restrictions on international trade. The first one is called tariff. The first restriction on international trade, the first government policy that regulates international trade, that is called tariff. Tariff, tariff. That is the first government policy or the first restriction on international trade. Okay? Now, what is tariff? Tariff is an import duty. Tariff is simply an import duty. Okay? It's an import duty. Meaning, this is the tax that will be applied, that is imposed, that is levied on imported items. The tax which is imposed on imported items, that tax, that duty is called tariff, import duty. You know, just like when you import something, you import a car, okay, you know, the duty is 125%, for example. Okay, whatever the price is, 125% will, it has to be added. It goes to the government as tax. So every product is taxed at a different rate. Okay, that's called tariff, number one. इसके दो types भी अभी बात करते हैं इस बारे में. But there are two important reasons why tariffs are imposed, yeah, they contribute towards the economic growth of the country. There are two important reasons behind tariffs. A, it is a good source of revenue for the government. Tariff is a good source of revenue for the government. When you impose a tax, you make a lot of money, you generate revenue. The tariff is a good source of revenue for the government. You know, जो हम अक्सर एक word सुनते हैं ना, smuggling. What is smuggling? Smuggling means when somebody tries to import something without paying the duty, without paying the tax. So that's illegal, obviously. So it's a good source of revenue for the government, A. And B, this is a good way of protecting the domestic industries. Tariff is an effective way to protect the domestic industry. To protect domestic industry. You know, किस तरह से? कि when imported items become expensive because of these taxes, customers will be inclined towards locally produced items, which are cheaper. Simple सी बात है. You impose a tax on imports, they will become expensive. And when they become expensive, the majority of customers will be inclined towards the domestically produced items, which are cheaper. So इस तरह से, it is a good way to protect the domestic industry. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा. I was saying there are two types of tariffs. Yes.
How it is a good source of revenue for government, because the money they are getting it is within the economy, not from outside.
No, it is a good source of revenue. वो इस तरह से, if somebody, you know, wants to bring something into Pakistan, you know, the government, otherwise, you know, if something is smuggled, for instance, why would the government penalize that person? Why is smuggling illegal? Why? Because that amount that you were supposed to pay to the government, Beshak the importer, he is based here, but the amount that you were supposed to give to the government, remember yesterday we discussed public expenditure? Okay, so the amount that the government generates through this tariff, ये भी तो tax है ना, कल ये बात हमने की थी. And this amount is supposed to be spent on public welfare, on strategic industry, जो कल हमने, the things that we discussed. So when somebody doesn't pay his taxes properly,
it is contributing into the economy.
Absolutely, it is contributed towards the economic growth. Or अगर if you smuggle something, इसका मतलब you're depriving the economy of the amount, which amount that the government was going to spend on your welfare. So absolutely, it contributes towards economic growth. And the tariff rates usually are very high also. This is a good source of revenue because the tariff rates are very high. Sometimes the price is doubled, even more than that, because you want to discourage imports and you want to encourage the domestically produced items. Okay? So, and remember, tariff is of two types. These are there are two types of tariffs. A, ad valorem tariff. It is not an English term. Ad valorem, ADVALOREM. I repeat, tariff is of two types. The first type is ad valorem, ADVALOREM. LOREM, ad valorem tax. That is type number 1. And the second type is specific tax. SPECIFIC, specific. So there are 2 types of tariffs, ad valorem tariff and specific tariff. Okay. Achha, what is the difference between these two? In ad valorem tariff, the first one, the tax is calculated as a percentage of price. Okay. In ad valorem tariff, the tariff is calculated or the tax is calculated as a percentage of price. कि भाई उस imported item की जो price है, the government might say 50% of that price or 100% of that price or 25% of that price, that is the tariff. So when the tax is calculated as a percentage of price, कि 100 रुपए की चीज है, 50% tax लग गया 150 की हो. That is called ad valorem tariff when it is calculated as a percentage of price. Price को monetary value भी कहते हैं, as a percentage of monetary value. And the second method, the second type of tariff is, बस method का फर्क है calculation का. Specific tariff is the one. Specific tariff is the one in which the tax is calculated on the basis of weight or quantity. Okay, in specific tariff, the tariff is calculated as a, in accordance with the weight or quantity of a product. Weight or quantity of a product. Okay, on every, just say on every 1,000 kilograms, you have to pay $25, for example. So when the tariff is calculated on weight, on the basis of weight or quantity, per unit भी हो सकते हैं. ठीक है, कि per unit you have to pay this much to the government. So depending on the government policy, either they can use ad valorem, यानी कि they calculate tariff according to the price, or specific, which is according to the weight or quantity. ठीक है, but the purpose is the same, like I said, generation of revenue and protecting the domestic industry. अब आ जाओ government policy number 2, restriction number 2, international trade, restriction number 2. That is called quota, Quota, quota. Quota is the second restriction on international trade. First one was tariff, the second is quota. Now, in case of quota, a physical limitation, in quota, a physical limitation is imposed on the imported or exported items. I repeat, in quota, a physical limitation is imposed on imported or exported items. Physical limitation means that this is the maximum that you can import. That this is the maximum that you can export. The government sets a limit. The government sets a limit to the maximum amount that can be imported or the maximum amount that can be exported. The government sets a limit due to certain reasons. Just say, in case of import quota, the reason is obvious. When the government places an import quota, what are they trying to accomplish? They want to strengthen, again, the domestic industry. Just let's suppose the demand is 100 chairs. The demand is 100 chairs in the country. The government says this year, the import quota is only 15 chairs. The demand is 100. The government says the import quota for chairs is 15. This means they're creating a gap of 85 chairs. ठीक है ना? They're creating a gap for 85 chairs. And who is going to fill this up? The domestic industry. The domestic industry will take advantage of this. Demand is there. There's an import quota. So they will try to meet the demand, the remaining demand.
Sir, does this have a limitation on time period in quota?
In quota, limitation in terms of time period, yeah. Because sometimes, the government keeps on assessing the economic conditions. Accordingly, they will decide whether, it has to be imposed for a year, for 6 months, for 8 months. depending on the economic situation. If they feel the domestic industry needs tremendous help, then the import quota will be imposed for a longer period of time. Okay? If they feel the situation is better, they can lift the import quota also. But yes, it's the time factor and the overall macro environment is taken into consideration. They keep on observing what is happening and they keep on adjusting their laws. The way we've seen in the budget also recently, they keep on adjusting the laws. What they decided last year, there might be some changes in those because the situation has changed. Yes, currently because of this corona issue, as we all know, the economy is in shambles. It is struggling. We are struggling. So obviously, the government has to make adjustments accordingly. So yes, the time factor is taken into account. So, Magar, the question arises, why an export quota? But the import quota to samajh mein aa gayi baat. You place an import quota so that you give an opportunity to the domestic industry. You give an opportunity to the domestic industry to fulfill demand. It makes good sense, I think. Okay, domestic industry ko chance milega, employment opportunities will be created, people will get jobs, production level will increase, so export kar de. But why an export quota? Because sometimes an export quota is also needed. An export quota is also needed. Export quota obviously means you cannot export more than this. Otherwise, exports are good. Because when you export something to England, you earn foreign exchange in the shape of pounds. You export something to the US, you receive dollars. You earn foreign exchange. The export quota, generally exports are good. They contribute towards the economic growth of the country. But sometimes an export quota is needed. And why do we need an export quota? When there is a shortage within the country. Recently we have, I don't know whether you have an idea, you have sufficient amount of general knowledge, you keep an eye on the current affairs. There's a sugar scam in Pakistan. Because this primarily was the issue. A lot of sugar was exported from Pakistan, whereas there was demand, there was a shortage of sugar within the country. Same was the case with wheat also. So export quota is needed when there is a shortage in the country and you don't want that particular product to be exported to another country. Something should be exported only if it is surplus. Aise hai na? Export something if it is surplus, more than what you need. But if there's a deficit, if there's a shortage within the country, when there's demand within the country, then exporting that particular item doesn't make sense. But eventually you will have to import the same item again. What's the point? Okay, so number one, export quota is needed sometimes when there's a shortage, when there's an issue, and the government just wants to take care of the fact that first demand within the country is fulfilled, and then only the surplus is exported. I'll quote another example here before winding this up for today. A few years back when that earthquake struck Pakistan and there was huge devastation. Okay? In those days, because of the earthquake, there were millions who were homeless and they needed shelter. So considering the situation, it was decided that there will be an export quota on tents. Pakistan, we export tents to other countries, Europe, etc. So an export quota was imposed on tents because after the earthquake, there was devastation. There was a huge issue. People, they needed a shelter. So because there was a sharp rise in demand for tents, rightly so, an export quota was imposed so that these cannot be exported. And first, the demand within the country is taken care of. That's export quota. All right?
Sir.
You can just write this down. Heading, just a minute. Just give the heading embargo. Embargo is going to be our next one. Yes, stop. Yeah, you had a question?
We can say that demand pull inflation can be created through excessive exports.
It can be created, yeah. That is right, actually. Yes, because absolutely that is a valid point. बिल्कुल ठीक है, because there'll be a gap between demand and supply. Absolutely, demand pull and short, because when there's a shortage, the prices will rise, and that is technically called demand pull inflation. That's absolutely correct. Say you can mention it here. ठीक है. So the third restriction that we'll start discussing tomorrow, that is embargo. EMBARGO. We'll try to learn what embargo is, and overall there are 5 or 6 different restrictions that we'll discuss. All right. This is it. Allah Hafiz.